With our head around the MVVM architecture, we can start building our application. The first step is to build our model, which is the description of the information. I've got some raw data here from GitHub, which I found, which is Australian postcodes. You can see the link down the bottom there. And let's go and have a look at that data. So this has a lot of complicated codes, which I didn't understand when I first saw them. So I had to read through the GitHub script README, and you can see down the bottom here that this is a description of what the JSON data will be. And from this, I'm going to select some data that I actually want that'll be useful to me inside the application. On this screen, I've got the raw data itself, which I thought was quite interesting because it's got a lot of information which I didn't expect, such as the electorate for voting, and actually the rating, so whether or not it is rural or very remote, which again, I think is quite interesting when you're looking at this data, that the user might want to know if it's a rural area or if it's a city area and so on. So I'm going to take one piece of this data. You can see a piece of JSON data starts at the squiggly brackets, the parentheses, and ends with a closing bracket. I only need one because each one of these pieces of JSON is identical. You can see it's got an ID in every piece of JSON, a postcode, locality, a state, the longitude, latitude, and so on. So they're all identical. They are stored, as we get to the top, in an array. So that square bracket there indicates an array. So I have an array of JSON objects, which I'm hoping to convert into an array of postcode objects in Swift. So I've taken one piece and I'm going to start a new file. I like Command N, Swift file, and I'm going to call it postcode. Since it's an object, a description of information, I give it a capital P. If I was to have a variable that is called postcode, albeit the selected postcode or current postcode or whatever it may be, if it's just called postcode and it's a variable, it should be a lowercase p. This is so the two don't get confused. And inside your code, you'll thank me later for having a capital P for the data object and a lowercase for the variables. I'm now going to do a /* and hit return immediately because I want to paste in my JSON data. Oops, didn't quite copy. Let me go grab another one. That one will do. Done. So as you can see, there's lots of information here. I'm just going to start removing things that I don't want. So I'm going to remove, I don't think I want all of this. Altitude might be interesting. Get rid of that. All of this. Yep, that can go. And that's not too bad. Okay. So I'm going to use this information. I'm going to download that information. Now, Swift will be smart about this. It'll ignore any other data within the JSON that isn't required. So our next step is to create a class object called postcode with a couple of squiggly brackets. This will be where I store the data that describes what a postcode is. And a postcode has a variable called ID, which is going to be an integer. I'm matching what the JSON data is using as labels. So this label, so this key, I should say, this key is ID. It has a value, a key ID has a value of this long number here, which without speech marks and being a whole number is an integer. Next will be postcode, and it will be a string. Although this is a 4-digit number, it's contained inside speech marks. So I don't want it as an integer, and I can't convert that string into an integer without some extra work. When working with postcodes, I am never, ever using them for a mathematical operation or anything similar for that matter. I also want to maintain the leading 0. If I was to place this in as an integer, Swift will drop off that 0 and consider it 810. So the speech marks help us have the data accurately stored inside the object. Var locality will also be a string. Speech marks give it away. The state will be a string. The longitude will be a double. Any decimal number that doesn't have speech marks around it is a double. The latitude will also be a double. The altitude will be a string. And the electorate rating will be a string. Now I do have an error here. This is saying that I do not have any initializers. The word initialize means to create. So when I create a postcode, it wants information. So let's just type init and I can see my helper, which I really appreciate because I'm gonna hit return and it's gonna write it for me. Bring down my brackets. So this is essentially a function that is asking for the information to go into the postcode. So currently I have a variable called ID that will be an integer. It has no value. If I was to put equals 0, the ID will be an integer and currently it equals 0. But without that equals, I'm yet to give it a value. And I'm unable to make a postcode without giving this a value. That's where the initializer comes in. Again, it's a function that asks for information and will assign it to these variables. So self-ID refers to this ID here, the ID of the postcode. This ID, which I've called the same for simplicity, is the ID that I have typed in to the initializer. So let's just quickly make a postcode. Let Coconut Grove equal a postcode. And you can see I've now got my little helper, little function, where I'm asked to give an integer. And I'd type in 19972, a postcode of 0810 in speech marks, and so on. Now, I don't want to go through all this process. Obviously, I'd far prefer the computer to download the information and put this in for me. So I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to make the postcode decodable, which means it can be decoded from JSON. So I can take this JSON and get it decoded into a postcode object. There's another protocol called encodable, where I am encoding this Swift object into JSON. Now, if you like both at the same time, you can do codable. Since in this project, I'm only decoding JSON into a postcode object, I'm just going to use decodable. I'm also going to tell Swift that I'd like you to make this object identifiable, which means the Swift code will look at this object and try and find one of these properties to be unique. And in this case, I feel pretty confident that ID will be unique. Most objects that we create will have an ID of some kind. Even back to our student example, a student will have a student ID or an email, which will be unique. So I've now made a postcode object that is ready to be downloaded from the JSON and converted into this object. And that's what we're going to go to in the next video.